So this is Bran 2, which is interesting because we were like, last time we said, oh, Daenerys 2. Oh, seems like we're not with Daenerys a lot. Well, haven't been with Bran for a while either. So
And we just talked about Rhaegar in the last chapter. Rhaegar is literally in the last sentence, and lo and behold, Rhaegar is a pretty important piece of this chapter, even though the name isn't mentioned.
Yeah. So let's dive in here. So hearing north to the wall. I think that should be heading north to the wall. That's the Song of Ice and Fire wiki. Okay, we just pull those straight from there. So that's what the summary says. So I believe it should be heading north to the wall. Bran and his companions slowly travel through the northern mountains. Bran tells his friends about the clans who live in the mountains and hills. To avoid freezing rain, the travelers shelter with a little, which this is something I actually had to look up and see what this was, and we'll dive into this. So they basically shelter with a traveler who turns out to be somebody they believe to be from House Little in a shallow cave. Sharing his food with them, the man warns that squids are in the wolf's wood and that the bastard boys are hunting along the King's Road. The man indicates that the bastard of Bolton is offering gold for wolf skins and for word on the Walking Dead, and he looks knowingly at Bran and Summer. The little also tells them about the old bear leading the Night's Watch into the haunted forest. The man leaves sausage and oatcakes and departs before they wake. Later, Mira tells the story of the Night of the Laughing Tree during a year of the fall spring. The story names no names, but the references are interesting because this is one of the most interesting chapters you'll actually come across, because she describes everything as a chronic man who had left Greywater Watch and visited the Green Men on the Isle of Faces. Returning home, he stopped at Harrenhal for the great tourney. 3 squires accosted him and mocked him for his short stature, knocking him to the ground until he was rescued by a she-wolf. A knight was named to the King's Guard, although his father was absent. During the feast, the wild wolf asked a maid with laughing purple eyes to dance with his shy brother. A pup offered the Chronic some armor so that he could take his vengeance on the squires during the tourney, but the little man turned him down. The Chronic prayed to the old gods, and the next day at the tourney, a mystery knight called the Knight of the Laughing Tree defeated the knights whose squires had wronged the Chronic. Instead of collecting a ransom from the 3 defeated knights, the mystery knight asked them to teach their squires honor. The Knight of the Laughing Tree disappeared before he could be unmasked, despite the fury of macaroni salad. Macaroni salad is delicious. Jimmy's messing with my summary here. Despite the fury of the king, who later might have macaroni salad on his brains, right? Because his brains probably look just like that. The tourney was won by the Dragon Prince, but Mira ends the story by saying that what happened next is a sadder tale that deserves its own telling. Bran has never heard this story before, and both reads are surprised that Lord Eddard never related it to him.
There is a ton in this chapter to go over. I wanted to see if you would continue to read from the teleprompter. I was hoping you would just roll right through it and just no sell it.
Oh, no sell it. Well, yeah, we will get to the Mad King at this as well, and because some of this is some 3-eyed raven stuff that might be hinting at stuff that Bran does later, including messing with the Mad King. So starting off here, right? No roads ran through the twisted mountain valleys where they walk now. Between the gray stone peaks lay still blue lakes, long, the deep and narrow, and the green gloom of endless piney woods. The russet of golden autumn leaves grew less common when they left the Wolfswood to climb amongst the old flint hills, and vanished by the time those hills had turned to mountains. Giant gray-green sentinels loomed above them now, and spruce and fir and soldier pines in endless profusion. The undergrowth was sparse beneath them, the forest floor carpeted in dark green needles. When they lost their way, as happened once or twice, they need only wait for a clear, cold night when the clouds did not intrude and look up in the sky for the ice dragon. The blue star in the dragon's eyes pointed the way north. As Osha told him once, thinking of Osha made Bran wonder where she was. He pictured her safe in White Harbor with Rickon and Shaggy Dog eating eels and fish and hot crab pie with fat Lord Manderley, or maybe they were warming themselves at the last hearth before the Great John's fires. But Bran's life had turned into an endless chilly day. Bran's life had turned into endless chilly days on Hodor's back, riding his basket up and down the slopes of the mountain.
Ice dragon, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Talking kind of about a constellation here, but me and Matt have also referenced the children's book that George wrote called Ice Dragon, which, by the way, even if you're not a child, I think it's actually a nice little contained story. And there's even a scene that's actually kind of grim in that book, even though it's for children. But you know what I was thinking about when I read this is like, I know some people have said, oh, is the Ice Dragon going to show up in Song of Ice and Fire? I don't think it'll be that Ice Dragon, but I do like to imagine that those two stories are in the same universe. Like they're looking at this constellation, and maybe one of those planets is where that story took place. And the reason why I feel this way is because George R. R. Martin's sci-fi novels and short stories are all part of a connected universe called the 10,000 Worlds series, and they're all loosely connected. Like you really don't know that they're connected until he tells you those things. But I almost like to think that A Song of Ice and Fire, hey, maybe it's in this universe with Ice Dragon and the Armageddon Rag and maybe some of the other stuff that George has worked on that's kind of adjacent to fantasy.
It could actually still be in the same. It could be part of Planetos, which is the world that we don't know what exists outside of Westeros, Essos. You know, we know a very little bit about it, but yeah, you don't know. And sometimes it's actually, you know, when you begin to look at worlds and fantasy universes and things like that. I mean, like you even say, like take like Middle Earth, right? You look at all of these things going on. And you don't know what's influencing things on the other side of the planet and stuff like that. It's, you know, it's crazy. You know, we don't know. We don't, like, we see, and then the land of winter kind of extends up and we don't know what's on where it goes. Like if it's like our world and, you know, you have like the North Pole and Greenland and that's all up there and it sort of goes up. I'll tell you what, when I flew over to Italy, it's kind of crazy. It was kind of crazy the way we flew back, because it's just like when you look at maps, you don't really think about it. But we flew like, you know, we didn't fly from Portland to London like the long way. We flew like this, you know, like the curvature. Weird. Just it's kind of weird. Weirded me out because I've never done that before. And it's like, oh, just weird to think about.
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
So like you don't know what's like up and over. Like as it like it, you know, if like the North Pole of Planetos is in the land of always winter, you know, what if that extends right over and then you could have the land that the Ice Dragon story takes place in.
Maybe the Ice Dragon is a prequel. Maybe it's a sequel. Who knows?
Who knows? It could be. It could exist in the same thing. You never know, and it's just on the other side of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still a big believer that an Ice Dragon could exist at some point in this. Will it tie back to that children's story? Who really knows?
Probably not. Yeah,
I would say the majority of us would say probably not, right? But it's still kind of cool to think about. And when I saw Ice Dragon with those capital letters, though, I immediately thought of the book, and I'm like, man, maybe I should read that for Christmas. It has a kind of a Christmas feel.
It does. We actually did a there's a podcast episode on it, and we posted the whole thing to YouTube where we had done it, and that was a lot of fun. I would be down to do it again, to go over it again.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so continuing on here. So this chapter is really kind of I think it's in two segments.
Yeah.
You have all of the stuff that happens before Mira tells her story, and then like Mira's story itself.
That's right.
So I think we'll wait to dive into all the Chronicman stuff, and we'll dive in. We'll kind of do this a little bit chronologically here. So it's kind of continuing on here, right? And then Bran is they're talking about the mountains, right? And she's saying, you know, I hate these stupid mountains, you know, of yours, Prince Bran. And we're beginning to get a little bit here of like the Bran Mira, like dynamic back and forth that I do think is going to play out totally different than in the show. Totally different.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised.
If actually important in the book.
Yeah, I do not think at all that Bran's going to just dismiss Mira and we just never see her again. Like, well, thanks
for the ride.
See ya. Yeah, I mean,
5-star on my Uber.
Yeah, I could see Mira like dying protecting Bran, and it's like a really sad moment. But I just don't think she's just gonna be like, all right, well, Bran's just like, all right, well, like peace. Yeah, well, I don't.
she and Jojen in the show, if you look at it face value, you would say, oh, up into those points later in the series, like, oh, it's really 1-for-1. But I actually don't think it is, because they are a vehicle in which to explain a lot of the mysticism and lore in the show. But in the books, they're doing that, and they're doing a lot of heavy thematic lifting, because in this section, like this very next section, when she's talking about the mountains, it is everything the story is about. It is
Yeah.
literally the entire encapsulated story. Because basically he says, yesterday you said you love these mountains. And she says, oh, I do. My Lord Father told me about mountains, but I never saw one until now. I love them more than I can say. Bran made a face at her, but you just said you hated them. And she says, why can't it be both? Because they're different, he insisted, like night and day, or ice and fire. If ice can burn, said Jojen in his solemn voice, then love and hate can mate. Mountain or marsh, it makes no matter. The land is one. One, his sister agreed, but over wrinkled. And I think that this is everything that George R. R. Martin is working on in this series, is to show that, like, you have all these petty disputes and everything, but this existential threat that they think is an existential threat is going to pull everyone together to be one people. And in that moment, I think he might be hinting at what the end of this thing is, right? It's about bringing these people together into this common cause. And I wonder, and this is where I get a little nutty, I wonder if that one at the end of the series could include the White Walkers. Because we've speculated that they're a group of, they're actual people.
It's like sentient beings.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they have this weird culture, and we're at to like coexist. It's almost like an alien invasion if you think about it that way. And maybe this one land that they're referring to, ice and fire, will have to be one. And the end of the story is actually an immigration. I think that's really interesting. And also, I will say, I think, based on some of the other stories I've read from George R. R. Martin, that is not that far-fetched. Some people might hear that and be like, that's crazy. I don't think it's actually that crazy. And I don't know. I just think Miri and Jojen do such a good job of being more than just a lore dump, but that they actually provide a lot of insight to like what the final end game themes will be.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And they're going to be way more important. There's some stuff that she says later too that we'll dive into when she's telling that story. That like totally caught me off guard. And I was like, hold on a second. But one of the other things you said here, and I actually kind of forgot about this, is, and I just want to bring it up, is right here when she's saying, I guess let me, hold on. Who is actually saying this here? No, this is Mira who's saying this, right? She's saying, oh, I do. My Lord Father told me about mountains, but I never saw one until now. I love them more than I can say. But Bran's like, but you just said you hated them.
Yeah.
So I just want to point that out, because here she says, she describes the stories she's heard about the mountains as her father, when later she's specifically describing the story that is pretty much about Howland Reed. She refers to him as the Chronic Man. I just want to like point that out, that here she is saying and telling about a story, my father, and then later it's going to be the Chronic Men, which is, sort of like the whole deal about that. So it continues on a little bit here, and Bran talks about some of the things that we'll also play into later, where they talk about like the Chronic Men magic and like the Chronic Men skills, and it's talking about, she's using her 3-pronged frog spear in order to get fish in the streams, and it's just talking a little bit about so there's some world building here, talking about how, like, the streams and the mountains there's not as much game to hunt, there's not as much food that's around, like basically describing the hardships that they're facing. But what it does is it sets us up for this person that they come across.
Yep.
And that's where things get really interesting. So go ahead. Yeah.
I was to say, it's almost like the further north you go, the harder it is to live. And it would almost make sense if another race of beings wanted to move south because they were tired of starving.
Could be.
It may. Who knows?
Could be. So as they're going on, then Bran, this all sort of this next segment here sort of, I think, actually it happens in sort of like a flashback, because there's that stupid thing again. What do you?
For those who are on audio only, Matt again triggered his emoji webcam thing.
It's the dumbest. I hate the new Apple OS system. Is so
Once an
stupid.
episode it happens, and I love it every
It's
time.
so dumb. Anyway, um, so, but this happens in a flashback, because Bran's talking about like a few days ago they met somebody. So they're all talking. Does no one live up here? Mira Reed asked as they made their way up, the way past winter. Granite upthrust as large as Winterfell. There's people, Bran told her. The Umbers are mostly east of the King's Road. The Wolves west of the mountain along the Bay of Ice. Harclays back behind us in the hills, and Knots and Littles and Norries, and even some Flints up here in the high places. His father's mother had been a Flint of the mountains. Old Nan once said that it was her blood in him that made Bran such a fool for climbing before his fall. She had died years and years before he was born, though, even before his father had been born. So there again, I just love that it talks about like old Nan doing something and then being like, God, that story that she was telling me from really long ago, to sort of add to more speculation of exactly how old is old Nan. So then they talk about like wool, and they bring up some people, Theo Wool, buckets, they used to call him. That's their sigil. 3 brown buckets on a blue field with a border of white and gray cheeks. Lord Wool came to Winterfell once to do his fealty and talk with father, and he had buckets on his shield. He's no true lord, though. They just call him the Wool. And then they talk about the Littles a little bit here. So they end up running into somebody. Because they're talking about these mountain clan and all of these things. So what ends up happening is they end up running into a man here, and this person, he offered them oat cakes and blood sausage and a swallow of ale from a skin he carried, but never his name, nor did he ask theirs. Bran figured him for a little. The clasp that fastened his cloak was gold and bronze and wrought in the shape of a pine cone, and the Littles bore pine cones on their white half of their green and white shield. Is it far to the wall? Bran asked him as they waited for the rain to stop. Not so far as the raven flies, said the Little, if that was who he was. Farther for them lacks wings. Bran started. I'd bet we'd be there if we took the King's Road, because he and Mira have been arguing about whether or not they should take the thing. So going forth, he does refer to him as Little, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he is. The Little took out a knife and whittled a stick. When there was a Stark in Winterfell, a maiden girl could walk the King's Road in her name day gown and still go unmolested, and travelers could find bread and salt and many at inn and holdfast. But the nights are colder now, and the doors are closed. The squids are in the wolfwood. There's squids in the wolf's woods, and flayed men ride the King's Road asking for strangers. The reeds exchange a look. Flayed men, the bastard boys, aye, he was dead, but now he's not. And paying gold and silver for wolf skins, a man hears, and maybe gold for word of a certain other walking dead. He looked at Bran when he said that. And yeah. So, and then he goes on a little bit more telling about the stuff of the old bear. They didn't come back. Dark wings, dark words, me mother used to say. But when the birds fly silent, seems to think me that's even darker. He poked at the fire with a stick. It was different when there was a Stark in Winterfell, but the old wolf's dead and the young one's gone south to play the Game of Thrones, and all that's left us is the ghosts. The wolves will come again, said Jojen solemnly. And how would you be knowing, boy? I dreamed it. Some nights I dream me mother, says Jojen saying it. So here he is. He said, some nights I dream me mother that I buried 9 years past, the man said. But when I wake, she's not coming back to us. There are dreams and dreams, my lord. Hodor said Hodor. So
By the way, the Hodor sections, like him just being Hodor, it is
yeah,
so well placed, and like
yeah.
it's amazing. I love it so much.
It's so good. So then they all end up essentially going to sleep. And then when they wake up, he was gone. When they woke the next morning, the fire had gone out and the Little was gone. But he'd left a sausage for them and a dozen oat cakes folded up neatly in a green and white cloth. Some of the cakes had pine nuts baked in them, and some had blackberries. Bran ate one of each and still did not know which sort he liked best. One day there would be Starks in Winterfell again, he told himself, and then he'd send for the Littles and pay them back 100-fold for every nut and berry.
Yeah, and House Little is very, very. I don't want to say loyal, but they know who they would rather be on the side of. These are people who are kind of on their own up there, but they respect the Stark name and they're not going to go for a Boltons. And I just think it's really interesting that George builds out in a very short amount of time this kind of the littles, right? Like just all of them. And
Little
we end up hearing
Liddle. Yeah.
yeah, Liddle. And then they are mentioned in A Dance of Dragons because they end up pairing up with Stannis to fight at Deepwood Mott. And one of the littles are the people who end up apologizing to Asha Greyjoy for cursing at her during the battle. And it's like kind of a humorous scene.
Yeah.
And then apparently it's Big Little, Middle Little, and Little Little, which is funny. And supposedly it's a reference to Little in Scottish standard lexicographic work of ancient Greek, which was published in 3 sizes called the Big Little, the Middle Little, and the Little Little. So George is kind of being cheeky here.
Yeah. So the interesting thing about this guy is, one, it's pretty obvious he knows exactly who Bran Stark is.
Oh, without a doubt.
Without a doubt, he knows exactly who Bran is, and he's warning him. Also, this is another indication that something's going on with the Boltons, because we still, we're reading this with the perspective of people who knows this is a reread. We know what's going to happen. Hold on a second here. Why are the flayed men going after the Starks?
Yeah, and you could easily just glance over that information and be like, all right, it's just some dude up in the Mountain Clan talking, like, who cares? But like, it's so painfully obvious at this point that the Boltons and the Freys are about to do something diabolical at this point in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. He also talks about the squids in the Wolf's Wood, which you should actually tell you, oh, that's like Asha Greyjoy.
Yep.
Yeah, but again, you would totally glance over it the first time. You're just thinking, because if you're reading this for the first time, you're thinking, oh, okay, well, that's probably like the Greyjoys, because they went and got in the whole deal. So this guy actually drops a ton of information. He knows exactly where the wall is, and he knows that the Lord Commander has ridden off.
Yeah.
And he's just supposed to be in the mountain. He's like part of the the mountain clan and stuff like that. So that's where some people wonder, is this guy even more than just like a little? So there's theories out there, about perhaps like blood ravens influencing him as almost like a test or something to Bran. Of like, are you going to turn back? Because a lot of this stuff then goes on to talk about like the green men and the green magic. And, Bran goes on to talk about, there's a line later when they get to that story, and Mira says something about like, well, some knights are the monsters and things like that too. So.
Well, I think another thing we can take kind of a context clue from is later in this book, Maester Aemon sends ravens to most of the noble houses from the north asking for help when the wildlings are at Castle Black. And one of those families is the Littles. So I think it might be likely that Aemon has been in contact with the Littles probably consistently with the birds. And maybe that's where he's getting his information from. Now, the one weird thing is the Bolton stuff, because that's not something Aemon should have any idea about, to be honest with you, unless if he's talking to like Manderley. But I don't think we ever even get an inkling of that communication. So that could explain the old bear riding out, but it's still Aemon communicating with him still would not really explain him knowing so much about the Boltons and the squids.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's like there are some people that speculate, from what I've seen online and stuff like that, that we know that some of the Littles end up going and joining Stannis later.
Yeah.
They join, and some people think that we may actually see like this guy, because we don't ever get his name, and he's just one of these Littles we see. And then there's another person later that Jon and Ygritte like run into when they're on their like way, before Jon leaves her and stuff like that. And they think, oh, maybe that was him too, but we don't know. So this is kind of like perhaps a mystery character that maybe he's just meant to be a small folk person. And it's just the way that George does it, where sometimes we run into like innkeepers, the innkeeper's wife or whatever. Other people speculate, no, maybe this guy is a little more important than we think, because he gives them shelter and supplies after they've been struggling for days, and was it perhaps influenced by a deeper,
Right.
darker, three-eyed power that could have like been like, okay, you need another helping hand to ensure that they get to the wall.
It would also play into the fact that the further north you move, the more magic there seems to be. Like the closer you end up getting up there, the more like reality changes almost. So it kind of plays into that piece of world building as well. So I kind of like this, and this is also one of the things that I just like love about these books and George R. R. Martin's writing is that I've read a lot of other series that have like innkeepers and stuff, and like usually, or not even just innkeepers, but like random side characters that are truly just side characters, and you can almost always tell that there's something up with them. Like I'm thinking of the innkeepers in Wheel of Time. Like
Right.
you immediately
Yeah.
know when one's going to be like off, right?
Yeah.
And this, I think, Little just kind of comes in very distinct and then walks away, and like you never get the obvious like wink, like, hey, you really have to sit here and listen to what he's saying and really
Right.
listen to him
And
whenever he has lines of dialogue.
and this is another character that sometimes I think about the idea of, is it one of the things I talked about that I thought was going to happen, but all the way back in season 8 was, I thought, when we were all speculating, and I think something like this could still happen in the books. I thought for a long time what would happen was Bran would do some sort of like wipe, like a time wipe thing. Like I really thought in season 8, I was like, the moment when Jon decided to tell them all about Daenerys, like about his birth, even when Daenerys specifically said, "Don't tell me," right?
Yeah.
Don't tell them. I kind of thought what was going to happen was like the Night King is going up to Bran, and like it's like, uh-oh, this ain't gonna work, and Bran like goes back in time and like, nope, this is the moment I have to fix in order to like fix everything so we could beat the Night King. Obviously it didn't go that direction, but in theory something like that could still happen. So is this somebody that Bran in theory is like in the future, like future Bran is being like, all right, I need to fix these moments, and like this guy could be one of them because he specifically like gives them food and shelter, and by doing so, Bran this entire time is saying, God, it'd be quicker if we took the King's Road. It'd be quicker if we took the King's Road.
Shoot, yeah.
There's a version where Bran probably, if multiverses and all that stuff and different timelines is all the rage right now. So, if all
It
that
wasn't as
worked,
overdone back then.
it wasn't as over. Yeah, exactly. Back then it wasn't. It was stupid thing. Back then it was way less. It was. I'm fixing that next time. It wasn't as overdone, like we said. So it could be a case where Bran like specifically gives them food and stuff that keeps them on the path they're going, which isn't to go to the King's Road.
And not to mention the fact that he ends up running into Sam. I mean, there are definitely moments where like you feel like this journey could really go off the rails, and then
he doesn't call out to Jon.
It's a slight nudge, right? And that's the big thing, is that even when Bran is interacting with the past, because it's not like this, it's not like some crazy thing where he can just like literally change everything. It's nudges, and even those nudges are fantastical. Whenever we hear the three-eyed Raven or Blood Raven talk about these things, like, oh, you can't interact with the past, you can't do these things. Yeah. So even the whispering is massive and it's the butterfly effect, right? There's also, I think it's called the bootstrap theory.
Bootstrap theory.
Yeah.
Like,
same thing.
Yeah.
Right?
They're a little different. Yeah. So they're kind of different. So like butterfly effect is if you go back in time and you influence something, like even the smallest thing, like it could cause a cataclysmic shift in a direction. Bootstrap theory, to what I believe, is actually a great example of it is like the Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time.
Okay.
So in the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, Link learns the song. Yes, yeah. Link learns the Song of Storms, right? Which is like probably the most famous song from that game, and it's the one that involves the windmill. But part of the problem is like Link doesn't learn it. It's like the way it works is like Link learns it, and then he goes back and he hears the person playing it and then learns it and then goes back in time and plays it so the person hears it. And it's like, well, how did that person hear it in the first place?
Yeah, you have a paradox there.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's what the bootstrap. Yeah.
I got you. Okay. Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that like a whisper, more of the butterfly effect that can do these things. But I guess what we're talking about with the fact that maybe he had to send this guy back because he would have died, but if he would have died, he could have never sent it. That is bootstrap,
Right.
right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of the thing with Bran, and there could be a lot of other characters that, in theory, future Bran is influencing, but I think it's Bran seems the most obvious for him to go back and influence his own events because he has so many moments that are like to the wire type of a thing, right?
You
I
want
mean,
to
like
hear?
when he doesn't call out to John, like what happens if he does? I mean, that like
Mhm.
when John is over there, I mean, it's such a big deal.
Here's my biggest edge case theory with all this brand timeline stuff, and it's actually something really stupid, and it's in this chapter. He talks about old Nan telling the same stories, right? Old Nan would tell the same story she told before, but we never minded. You have to visit them. A good story is like old friends, she used to say. You have to visit them from time to time. And it got me thinking about like old Nan's stories and how important they are to Bran. And we're seeing how important they are whenever he's listening to Mira and he's like kind of digesting the story through what he knows. And he's actually editing her story, like, oh, you should have had this and this, not realizing that she's telling him the truth, right? But what if, those stories about White Walkers and giants and stuff that Brandon talks about? Like, what if he had influenced somehow old Nan to tell those stories to him, that therefore opening him up to the idea of
Oh,
mysticism and fantastical elements? Now, you do get into the bootstrap issue there because it's like, well, if she didn't say it and it changed it, then how did he go back and do that? But I don't know. There's something about old Nan's reoccurrence in this chapter specifically that I'm just like, man, I feel like old Nan. I'm not saying she's going to save the world or anything, but she's definitely very significant. And for at least Bran's character arc, she has influenced him greatly. Honestly, he talks more about old Nan than he does his mom.
yeah. And they talk about if is old Nan still alive because we don't know. We have
Yeah,
no idea.
because you think Theon done it, and remember, Mira ends up saying in this chapter, she's like, "Oh no! Like there were also Iron Man dead too," and she's kind of alluding to the fact that there was another player there, aka the Boltons, and it's
Well, the Bolton definitely would have killed her.
yeah. Oh, and I think
I mean, he didn't just kill every single person there, but I mean, rub him the wrong way, and yeah, he's gonna kill her.
what if the ghosted? Oh my god, what if the ghost of Winterfell is old Nan? The one that
Well,
whispers to Theon. People always want to know who it is, and people think it's like Theon whispering to himself. But there's been other theories about who the ghost is. Whenever Theon's becoming
right,
Theon again, dude,
right,
what if it's old Nan?
could be. And we just presume because Theon's like he's like in his own head. Well, that's gonna be a fun chapter to explore. I mean,
In 3 years when we get there, yeah.
we're a ways away from that one, but
That's like
we
in the Dance of the Dragons.
yeah, we'll get there.
We'll
So,
save it for that episode.
but on that, I mean, of course, we could always do a special episode or something or Patreon. But on that, we do dive into Hodor a little bit here too.
Mhm.
But I mean, before that, God, there's so much. So, after the guy leaves, this says the trail they followed was a little easier that day. And by noon, the sun came breaking through the clouds. Bran sat in his basket up on Hodor and felt almost content. So they say, look, she said, pointing at the sky with her frog spear, an eagle. And then Bran looks and he thinks about flying. Right. So now he's on this path again. So the path was hard before, and the path was hard. How is the path? The path they were on that was hard, and they were thinking, oh, maybe we should just go on the King's Road. It's easier. And if we go on the King's Road, what happens is being a Stark actually is the thing that could cause
Yeah,
us trouble.
which
But
is interesting.
now we've met this guy who gives us some food. Oh, and the path's easier. Oh, and look, an eagle that's flying. You know what? Flying is better than climbing, right? And I should be able to do it. The Green Seers could do it. I should be able to do it too. And he tried and tried until the eagle vanished. It's gone. We'll see others, said Mira. They live up here, I suppose. Hodor.
Other.
Then, yeah, I know that too. Yeah, yeah. Hodor likes it when you say his name, I think. Hodor's not his true name, Bran explained. It's just some of the old words he said. His real name is Walder, old Nan told me. And then they talk about then they go into that too.
Which is also our first clue that, like, okay, well, he's saying Hodor, but that's not even his name. So why is he saying Hodor? Which eventually, in Winds of Winter, we will find it to mean hold the door.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah. So then we get into the next moment where once they talk about that, they talk about, do you know stories? And so we could dive into that, or we could save it for a part 2. Jimmy, I'll leave it up to you.
Well, honestly, I think it might be a good idea to really go in to the details on Night of the Laughing Tree. I don't think it's a problem to make this 2-part episode, because I think if we really do it the way we should, I think it'll take 30, 45 minutes to an hour to go through the Night of the Laughing Tree. But the one thing I will say is that obviously this chapter goes on to tell that story and talk about Lyanna Stark and how she is, in my opinion, she's a Night of the Laughing Tree, in my opinion. So it's just an interesting parallel that Bran is having to hide his identity on this way and stay off the King's Road and not be a Stark. And then Lyanna Stark had to not be a Stark to do what she wanted to do, which was compete in the tournament and stand up for her friend. You know, it's just like a really interesting parallel of like hidden identities, which, God, there's so many in
well,
this.
and think about this too, because in the story, Mira refers to this story as, and I'm down. Yeah, we'll do the second block of this as a second one. And it's Thanksgiving next week, so it'll be kind of a good fun one for the holiday. So, you know, she calls him the Chronic Man. Is it because she knows it and she's trying to not say my father as Howland Reed? Like there's kind of a hidden identity there too as well.
There is absolutely influence there. So first off, we have to realize that we're being told this chapter through Bran's perspective. And that's a really important piece of information to have, because I think there are things that Jojen and Mira know that they have not told us because they haven't told Bran, and they know they're not supposed to. And I think that is why she refers to her father as the Chronic Man. But also, I think it's possible that maybe when you go to the Isle of Faces, you don't come back the same.
Yeah.
And that's a whole nother thing. Like next episode will really be going about the Night of the Laughing Tree, but also going into the Isle of Faces and what it could mean. And of course, we're going to speculate on what we think, Howland Reed's up to right now, because he's alive in the story, by the way.
Yes.
Just completely forgotten by the show, but in the books, it's significant. It is mentioned multiple times. There's, of course, the Howland is the High Sparrow theory, which doesn't really hold up when you put it under scrutiny, in my opinion. But I think that I think they're trying to push Bran in a direction and see if he can put the pieces together, seeing if Eddard had in fact told him these stories, which I have theories about why he has never told his children the story, but we will save that for when we go over the Night of the Laughing Tree, the Tourney at Harrenhal, which is in some ways the key to the whole series. I will also say that supposedly there's going to be a Broadway play written by George that will go over actually what happened at the Tourney of Harrenhal. And me and Matt have already said we will be first in line.
Oh, we'll be going 100%. Yeah. And we may be back later this week, because we don't know. The trailer for season 2 is supposed to get teased at any moment now. Apparently the insiders have seen it for House of the Dragon.
I'm telling you, man, thinking about this, obviously we're excited for season 2 House of the Dragon, but the fact of the matter is we're going to have this summer on Bend the Knee, we are going to give you all the coverage for House of the Dragon season 2. And then as soon as we catch our breath and we go into the fall and we do the holidays this time next year, we're going to be getting a trailer for Dunk and Egg, A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. And then it's probably going to be on in January, Matt.
Yeah.
Every 6 months, we're going to have a Song of Ice and Fire show. Well, probably more like 9 months.
Yeah. To go right along with Jimmy's Doomsday Counter, who said November 2024.
Listen, if 2024 is the debut of Dunk and Egg and Winds of Winter, like that's it. Like we'll never get that peak ever again. Like that will be the end of the. You know what's crazy? Sorry, I'm going to go off a little bit of a speculation.
No, you're fine here. Yeah.
What if Winds comes out and it is insane, like which we already figure it will be, and there will be points of the show in the books, we know that, but we already knew just baseline that there were a lot of things that were going to be different and there were some things that are going to be the same. But since then, George has talked about, hey, I'm starting to figure out that a lot of things are going to be different, so he is changing things. What if Winds of Winter drops 2024, 2025, 2026. And it is this massive thing. It lights the internet on fire, and HBO goes, shit, we got to tell that story now.
So I've been thinking a lot about this. Here's what I think legitimate this is what I would say right now if that happened. Right now, Warner Brothers is shopping their own intellectual properties out to other, especially like animation and stuff like that. They're shopping their own intellectual properties out to other companies to say, hey, if you want to do something. So, a while back they did that Batgirl movie.
Yeah.
And when they merged, the way it works is you can actually like scratch it and takes it as a tax write-off, but you can like never show it. They actually just did and I guess it's like almost done or something, a Wile E. Coyote, like, animated movie, Looney Tunes, and they're not going to release it themselves, and they're shopping it around for distribution. There was a Batman thing that they shopped and Netflix picked up. So like, they're not even doing their own like in-house animation on that. What I hope for, because I think it's going to be a long time before we see a Game of Thrones,
a live action remake.
Live action remake.
Long time.
Long time. What I think is most likely is, and I would love it, is I would love for Netflix, because they're really good at it, to say, hey, we want to do an animation, whether it's like an anime, like the way they did the Witcher one, like an anime style adaptation of Game of Thrones. I think it would be super cool. I think you could do like, anime seasons are totally different than everything else, because sometimes they're like 80 episodes of season one, like the way they number stuff's totally weird. I think it'd be the best way to do it.
Yeah, if you want a good example of what somebody can do with animation and be a very serious and adult show, you should watch Castlevania on Netflix. It is it is phenomenal.
So good.
The score is phenomenal. The voice acting is phenomenal. The animation feels very adult and mature. It does not feel like you're watching a kid's cartoon and just like, sitting next to a teenager. I mean, it feels like a very serious show. Animation has a lot of stigma attached to it, but that is slowly starting to peel away. Most likely because of the millennial generation growing up with it. But I think you're right. I think if we got to retell, I'm just wondering, like, the Winds of Winter could change so many plot threads that to where it's like the studio just looks at it as like, how do we not capitalize on this? Like, this is new material from George R. R. Martin.
Yeah.
I mean, they wrote a history book and they made a television show out of it. If he gives us Winds of Winter and it does diverge a lot, which it will, like, how do you look at that as a company that wants to make hand over fist, and you look at your most successful adventure of all time and say, well, we're just not going to do that. Like, I just don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, movies are different because it's much easier to like reboot something with a movie. I mean, look at Spider-Man. Spider-Man's been like rebooted like 3 times in the past 20 years. It's easier with movies. It's a lot harder with TV, because TV, you're setting up like, we're going to be doing this for like a decade.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
it's hard.
I think it'll be minimum, and I mean minimum, 20 years before we would see like another live action television show. But
because it's also not like Game of Thrones was bad. Like, it's one thing if you try it and it flops and somebody else is like, okay, we can do it better. We can do it better. Right. Yeah. Like, we can take that property and we could do a better, like, I mean, even something like Battlestar Galactica, for example. I mean, I haven't watched either, but I know that there was an original version and it was not good. And then they said, we're going to redo it, and it was like much better. And people really seem to like that. But it's hard. It's really hard to think of something that like came out and even did like okay, and they said, all right, we're going to reboot that like entire TV show within a couple years. I mean, it's going to be probably a long time, because Game of Thrones still kills it in streaming numbers.
And that's what I was about to say. And that's the problem, right? Is that, listen, most adaptations suck. That's the truth. Game of Thrones, we know season 7 and 8 weren't good. We're aware. But for a decade, they killed casting, costuming, set, score. They killed literally everything. And the risk you run if you were to try to redo it, especially so soon, is that you could mess all of that up. And honestly, do we really want to see a Jon Snow that looks different, or a Daenerys that looks different? No, that is the canon. That's what I'm saying. It probably take 2 decades. But I don't know how Warner Brothers doesn't look if this book were to come out and it's going to be a mega hit, but like it's just so different and it's getting trending worldwide. I just don't see how they don't like do something, right? Like
They adapt a season 9 for it.
oh my, I mean, yeah, but there's so many plot points that like, you know what I mean? And maybe they don't do anything. Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know. Warner Brothers did the Deadwood movie. HBO did the Deadwood movie.
Well, I'm wondering about movies. That's kind of where I'm
Yeah.
kind of pushing towards. It's like, could you do an alternate movie? I don't know.
I don't know that you do an alternate movie. Like the Halloween franchise, from what I told, is like one of those where it's almost like a choose your own adventure thing at this
Bro,
point because
it's a
they've
mess.
yeah, like that, and yeah.
Still kind of fun, though. The stakes are very low in Halloween.
Right, yeah. So I don't know if you do something. I don't know if you do something like that, but that's kind of the thing with Snow too. Is like, ooh, you know, if Snow comes out, does
It has to.
kill the chance?
That's right.
Does
It's
it
gonna follow
does
the canon
it
path of the show. It has to.
right?
And
So
that's
that
why
would so what would actually be great is if Winds comes out and then Snow sort of like incorporates some of that and gets it going back in like the right direction to kind of take some of the elements and bring it back. I will say this real quick about Game of Thrones is actually somebody posted this in the Game of Thrones subreddit the other day, and the way you experience shows, I think sometimes influences how you feel about them. And we were all there, and we were all there for the hype of this is the biggest show in the history of television, and we had to wait. Remember, like it was a long time between seasons 7 and 8 because they had to like film these massive things and they had to wait for it to get cold. You know, like that was part of the thing was a schedule. Like, well, we can't film in the summer, we need to film in the winter, and all of this stuff. But I saw this big article on the Game of Thrones Reddit the other day where somebody was saying, "Hey, I just watched it for the first time and I binged it," and they're like, "I didn't feel like it was as bad." And a lot of the subsequent comments were like, "Yeah, I think like people who binge it, like you don't, yeah," and that's going to be the way that everyone experiences it going forward. Is people are going to click, all right, I'm going to watch like the way I watched The Sopranos for the first time. I wasn't, you know, like the ending for me, I was like, oh, it's okay, cool. That's the ending is what it is. But I wasn't there for like everyone sitting there but you know, the internet
There are
wasn't
so many things like this, dude. Like that's why I always have said controversial endings usually age better. I'm not gonna say all perfect, but they age better because of the way that they are consumed and also the way people talk about it or don't talk about it. Dark Tower by Stephen King is another example of this. There was long periods. I mean, we're talking Winds of Winter waits between some of the books, and people would get a book and they'd be like, "This is trash." You know what I mean? Like but then if you binge it, I mean, it's still pretty wild and out there and it's very experimental, but to me, I had a good time with it. But when I talk to people who don't like it, almost always they are people who are waiting for it to come out. And then when they explain to me, I go, oh yeah, I'd have been pissed if I got Song of Suzanne at book 6 and it was 180 pages and it was honestly not very good. Like I would have been furious, but to me, it was just a bridge to get to the final book. So I didn't really care. So I've always said that about endings. And The Sopranos is another great example. I mean, there were people calling HBO wanting refunds, and then it turns out that now it's ranked one of the best endings. Like users rate that way. So, and
I liked it.
Listen, there are problems with 7 and 8, like just continuity problems. There's character problems, and the show went in a different direction. But I do believe that, I mean, even now the show is aged pretty well. Like I know everyone said, look, it fell out of favor in public discourse or popular discourse or whatever, but that's not true. It's still one of the top streaming shows every single year. And it will continue to be probably for the rest of our lives.
Listen, so is The Sopranos though.
Oh yeah. And that's what I'm saying. Great shows will last.
So is Breaking Bad. You know what I mean?
Great shows will last for sure. I will say this. I'm just pondering these questions about Winds of Winter, but to be honest with you, I don't really care. I want the book, like, because I'm a book first guy. I just want the book, but it just makes me wonder, you know, looking at opportunity in these greedy studios, like there's no way someone isn't like, I want to tell that book. That book needs to be on screen. But how you do that is almost insurmountable as a challenge, unless if you did animation. So
yeah. Ooh, we'll see. We'll see if they end up doing something. I mean, Warner Brothers is the same studio that did the Zack Snyder cut, where they said, "Okay, hey, we're gonna let you redo
crazier things have happened."
Yeah. So I mean, it like, well, I guess what I'm saying is like it has happened.
Yes.
It has legitimately happened, and the studio that has allowed people to kind of go back and finish their stories is Warner Brothers, for better or for worse. I mean,
Yeah, and Ryan
so
Condell's young, so he'll be around a long time. So maybe his capstone will be the remake in 30 years, and me and you will be in our old folks' home covering it on our, hand computer. I mean, at that point, we've got to have like computers coming out of our hands, right? Like holographics.
it'll be Neuralink all in our brain.
Yeah, I hope. Just give me
I mean,
robo eyes, dude.
unless global warming has flooded the earth, and
Well, that'll probably happen. White Walkers will be a real thing because it'll be people coming from
yeah,
I don't know where.
I don't know.
Antarctica, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just things to think about. I think it's going to be an exciting time though here on the podcast for the next foreseeable future with 3 or 4 seasons of House of the Dragon combined with 3, maybe 4 seasons of Dunk and Egg. This could be very interesting.
And I would not count out the idea. I did see something the other day because Hogwarts Legacy just came out on Switch, and it's the fact that it runs on that is insane. But yeah, one of the things Warner Brothers has been, they said too. It was like an IGN article I was reading talking about. They're like, yeah, we have to like make a lot. We want a lot more of our big franchises to have video games. And I mean, Warner Brothers actually, to be honest, they make like really good. They're actually like all the Arkham games are great. The Hogwarts Legacy, from everything I've heard, is great.
Just give me a FromSoft Game of Thrones, and I'll lose my mind. I will literally never do it. You'll never see me again. It'll be.
I want what Skyrim was supposed to be, and
yeah,
we would never see it. If Bethesda did it,
from then I'll take it. I don't want Bethesda now.
We'd never see it. It would take. I mean, how is that? I mean, the Lord of the Rings games do kind of suck, but and we'll wrap this up here. We'll wrap this up here. But how is there not a Game of Thrones?
It's a bag
video game that's like so good. I mean, that property's just sitting there. How is in the world of like people trying to create sequels and all this? How has nobody just gone in and be like, oh, I want to make a Game of Thrones game?
Truthfully, it's probably because the demographic is probably a little bit older than what most gamers are. That's my guess.
Yeah, but I feel like you could still just do it. And as long as you make a good game, it's a good game.
Oh, I agree. But I'm just saying that might be one of the reasons why. And also, it was a lot of more of like the general audience doing it, not so much gamers. And they did do all those Facebook games and mobile games that I know sucked, but they cleaned house. They cleaned house. So,
even if they did something like Shadow of Mordor, like the Shadow of Mordor game, which is like, hey, we're going to make our own little like pocket in the universe, and it doesn't have to, it's like kind of connected, but it's something you could totally.
I mean, even if they brought back the Telltale game and finished it, I'd be happy.
Yeah,
possible. They're back. That studio is back. We'll see. I doubt it.
We'll see. And hey, we will be back next week and we'll finish up this chapter. And really, it's going to be just a deep dive into the Chronic Men story and the Night of the Laughing Tree, Tourney at Harrenhal episode for Thanksgiving. So with that, guys, as always, we want to thank you for playing the Game of Thrones. We will see you next week. And remember that winter is coming.